We often look to the past to understand ourselves. Tonight, we turn our attention to the year 1912 and the solemn story of Josiah B. Moore and his family. It's a case that reminds us that behind historical records are real people whose lives were irrevocably changed by the events that transpired. This is their story, as best as it can be told. Our setting is Villisca, Iowa, a small, bustling railroad town nestled in the rolling hills of the American Midwest. In 1912, it was the picture of wholesome early 20th century life, a place of whitewashed churches, a thriving town square, and a close-knit community where neighbors knew each other by name and children played freely in the streets. It was a town that believed in the safety of unlocked doors and the inherent goodness of its people. But on a single warm June night, that profound sense of security would be annihilated, replaced by a dark and enduring mystery that haunts the town to this day. At the heart of Villisca's social and business community was the Moore family. Josiah, aged 43, was a successful and well-respected businessman, the owner of the local John Deere farm implement store. He and his wife, Sarah, aged 39, were prominent members of the Presbyterian Church. Their life revolved around their 4 children, 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Mary Catherine, 7-year-old Arthur Boyd, and 5-year-old Paul. By all accounts, the Moores were a happy, prosperous, and well-liked family. Joining them on the fateful night were 2 neighborhood girls, 12-year-old Lena and 8-year-old Ina Stillinger. They were friends of the Moore children and had been invited to stay the night after attending a church event. 8 people in total, 2 families united by friendship, settled in for the night at the comfortable Moore home on East 2nd Street, entirely unaware of the evil that was about to descend upon them. Sunday, June 9th, 1912, was a day of faith and celebration in Villisca. The Presbyterian Church was hosting its annual Children's Day program, an event organized and coordinated in large part by Sarah Moore. That evening, the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters walked to the church, taking their places in the pews for an evening of psalms, recitations, and music. Friends and neighbors would later recall seeing them, a picture of familial contentment. The program concluded at around 9:30 p.m. The Moore family and the Stillinger girls joined the crowd filing out of the church into the warm, late spring air. They walked the few blocks home together, a happy, chattering group under the dim streetlights. It is believed they arrived home between 9:45 and 10 p.m. They prepared for bed, likely with cookies and milk, before the house fell quiet. It was the last normal act of their lives. The next morning, Monday, June 10th, the sun rose on a strangely silent Moore residence. A next-door neighbor, Mary Peckham, grew concerned when she noticed the house was still and quiet well into the morning. The family's chores were undone, and no one had come outside. After her attempts to raise the family by knocking on the door failed, she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross arrived with a spare key, but found he could not open the front door. It was locked from the inside. He went around to the back, let himself into the kitchen, and then unlocked the front door to let Mary Peckham inside. They stood in the downstairs parlor. The room was dark, the windows covered by curtains. As Ross Moore opened the door to the guest bedroom just off the parlor, a sense of profound dread filled the air. He saw 2 small figures in the bed and dark stains on the bedclothes. He backed out immediately, telling Mary Peckham not to go in, but to get the town marshal. Villisca's town marshal, Hank Horton, arrived a short time later. He entered the home, and his investigation began. In the downstairs guest room, he found the bodies of Lena and Ina Stillinger. Upstairs, the full horror was revealed. In the master bedroom lay the bodies of Josiah and Sarah Moore. In the adjacent children's room, he found Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. All 8 victims had been brutally bludgeoned to death in their beds as they slept, the weapon a heavy axe. The scene was one of shocking violence, but it was also marked by a series of bizarre and eerie details. The killer had taken the time to cover the faces of every victim with bedclothes after they were dead. Every mirror and piece of glass in the house had also been draped with cloth. At the foot of Josiah and Sarah's bed sat a kerosene lamp, its chimney removed, its base wiped clean of fingerprints. The axe, which belonged to Josiah, was found in the guest room, bloody but also wiped down. The discovery of the murders sent a wave of terror and disbelief through Villisca. What happened next, however, was a catastrophic failure of crime scene preservation. As news spread, hundreds of curious and horrified townspeople descended on the Moore house. For hours, a crowd moved through the home, touching objects, walking through bloodstains, and contaminating every piece of potential evidence. By the time the scene was secured, it was irretrievably compromised. The subsequent investigation was a chaotic affair, involving multiple agencies with conflicting methods. Bloodhounds were brought in, but the trail went cold at a nearby riverbank. Investigators were left with a baffling crime, a killer who had seemingly vanished into thin air, and a town paralyzed by fear. The person who had committed this terrible act had likely been hiding in the house, waiting for the family to fall asleep, and had left by locking the door behind them. A ghost in their own community. In the vacuum of evidence, suspicion and paranoia began to fester, tearing the community apart. The first and most prominent local suspect was Frank F. Jones, a powerful Iowa state senator and Villisca's wealthiest citizen. Josiah Moore had worked for Jones for years before leaving to open his own highly successful rival company, a move that created significant business animosity. Rumors, never proven, also suggested a personal dimension to the feud, involving an alleged affair between Josiah and Jones's daughter-in-law. Many townspeople subscribed to the theory that Jones, too powerful to act himself, had hired an outside killer to eliminate his competitor. This theory eventually focused on a man named William Blackie Mansfield, a suspected contract killer and serial murderer with a history of similar crimes. Years later, a grand jury would indict Mansfield for the murders, but the case was ultimately dropped for lack of evidence. Another major suspect emerged from the events of the Children's Day service itself. Reverend George Kelly was a traveling minister who had been a guest preacher at the church that fateful Sunday. He was known for his eccentric behavior and had a history of mental health issues. Observers noted that he seemed unusually interested in the Moore family during the service. Reverend Kelly left Villisca on a train in the very early hours of June 10th, before the bodies were discovered. Years later, in 1917, while in custody for another crime, he confessed to the Villisca murders in stunning detail. His confession, however, was filled with bizarre religious justifications, and he recanted it soon after. Despite this, He was put on trial in 1917. The first trial ended with a hung jury, and a second trial later that year resulted in his acquittal. The strange preacher, like all the others, walked free. Over the years, the list of potential suspects grew, becoming a gallery of intriguing but ultimately unprovable possibilities. One of the most compelling suspects for modern researchers is Henry Lee Moore, a different man with the same surname who was a convicted serial killer. Months after the Villisca murders, he used an axe to murder his own mother and grandmother in a chillingly similar fashion in Missouri. He's known to have been in the region, and his pattern of overkill matched the brutality of the Villisca crime. Other theories focused on a transient named Andy Sawyer, who was briefly detained after allegedly showing foreknowledge of the crime, but he was later cleared. Each new lead and each new suspect only led to another dead end. Grand juries were convened and investigations were launched and relaunched, but no one was ever convicted for the slaughter of the 8 victims. The Villisca Axe murders were never solved. The crime left a permanent scar on the town, which was forever changed from a place of open-door trust to one of suspicion and fear. The case stands as one of the most terrifying and perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. It is a chilling story of how an entire family and their young guests could be erased in a single night by an unknown killer who then simply vanished, leaving behind only questions, grief, and a legacy of terror. The White House on East 2nd Street still stands today, a silent monument to the 8 lives that were so brutally taken, and to a crime that has become a dark and enduring piece of American folklore. Thank you for spending this time with us. Reflecting on these past events is a way of remembering the individuals involved and the impact their stories had on their communities. If you have any thoughts on today's case, we invite you to share them respectfully in the comments below. We hope you will join us again for our next true crime case.